Hello, Lev. It is delightful to have you with us at a Musical Odyssey crowd. Everybody's very exciting to meet you in next year. And I just thought it would be really nice to have some questions posed to you and find out a little bit more about you and what you do. So my first question is, can you tell me a little bit about your musical tradition that you're coming from?
Well, it's a long story. I'll be short.
Okay.
I'm coming from Moscow, and I was born there, and I lived there for what, 28 years, somewhat. And during that considerable amount of time, I managed to get the basic education in music with very nice people, with great people, you know. Among them, somebody who probably none of you know, but probably should. And his name was Ruben Kazaryan. And he was my school teacher. And he smoked cigarettes, novice, at the lessons. It was allowed at that point. And his room was about 25 square meters. And there was one brown piano, Zyla, awful instrument. And he smoked about 2 packs during my lesson, which was about an hour and a half. And he was then 65 and I was then 7. And he explained everything to me. He was a great teacher. And then he delivered me. I cannot think of another word, except delivered. He delivered me together with my wonderful mom to someone whose name was Boris Zemlansky, who was a genius pianist and a genius pedagogue, both, and an incredible musician. And so thus I bypassed a school which is worldwide known and considered as the best, and it probably is, music school in the world. That is Central Music School in Moscow, where I also studied for about a year, and then my mommy took me out of there. And that's how I ended up with Zemlansky, who delivered me again to Lev Natochenny, who was my mentor and friend and teacher for 5 years, until his death in January of '74, at which point I got lucky and got introduced to Eliso Versaladze, who was 37 years old and as gorgeous as a ballerina, and even more talented. And she is, my God, what am I saying? Well, because everybody else was. So she's an incredible artist. No wonder. It doesn't take me to say that, because she is. She's an incredible pianist and a very interesting human being. And Eliso is now 78. And still very active and working and having students and going to competitions and so on and so forth. So that is in brief my whole history. Well, maybe it would be interesting also to say that we talked about it already, but I will just say for your audience, maybe once more, because I was always very interested from the very beginning. I was always very interested in chorus. I think I told you already. This is my first love, actually, and I studied under Andrei Kazhevnikov and Vladislav Gennadievich Sokolov. Both were absolutely great, phenomenal choir masters with incredible ears and phenomenal mastery. And Kazhevnikov taught me to conduct, and so I got a knack. I am in no way a conductor, I cannot play that. But I at least know the basics. And of course, I know the chorus quite well because I graduated, and so in that field, and so I know that. But I abandoned that at the age of 20, and then I did only piano. So for the rest of my life, I never came back to vocal profession or to chorus, which sometimes I regret, but it's okay. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because it instilled in me love for, I would say, love for polyphony, which of course we pianists all have inherently, unlike, let's say, string players or wind players or whatever. But a voice is a voice. There is no instrument like a voice.
I agree. You have a brilliant career as a performing artist, both as a pianist and chamber music performer. I'm not going to mention the number of competitions you won, and we might not touch upon this, but your career was very successful and is still thriving. Can you tell us, let's say, 3 most memorable concerts or collaborations with your fellow artists that happened in your life, or more?
Sure. Sure. Let's say my say from collaborations, I would mention 3 people. I would mention Stanley Drucker. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about. Stanley Drucker is the solo clarinet of New York Philharmonic. And he was the first clarinet in New York Philharmonic for 50 years. I think the only orchestra player who ever served so long in a major orchestra, I think. I might be wrong. Stanley Drucker is a clarinetist numero uno in America anyway. And he retired just recently because he was in New York Philharmonic. He played when Lenny Bernstein was the music director. And he just retired, okay? So I recorded and played with Stanley both Brahms sonatas, which I absolutely adore, and which I think are probably the best instrumental things. I exclude the orchestral things instrumental things that Brahms ever wrote. And then to add a little spice to that, we played sonatas for clarinet and piano, opus 120, Brahms and Poulenc. That was for little spice. And we did this in 93. Long time ago. But he was an incredible artist. The other thing, collaborations wise, I did with Misha Maisky, and that was in New York, actually, at 92nd Street Y, if you know what it is. It's a wonderful concert hall. I think the third in importance in New York anyway. Carnegie, Ellis Stanley, and the 92nd. Yeah, I guess about the third. Yeah. And among other things, we did the Shostakovich Sonata, among other things. Also Schubert, of course, Arpeggione. You cannot escape that. But also Shostakovich Sonata. And the third collaboration was an absolutely wonderful collaboration in Italy with a very good friend of mine, I think one of the best pianists of our time, certainly, and maybe one of the best pianists of the century. Somebody whose name is Vladimir Felsman. So we collaborated in a very interesting fashion. We played forehands, all kinds of things, Brahms and Schubert and whatnot. And then we played with the Russian National Orchestra, conducting and playing two Mozart concerti. He played, I think, Adur, yeah, the 488, and I played the C-moll 491. So those are, I mean, those are stuck in my mind. Now, as far as concerts goes, Carnegie Hall, I would certainly remember. I certainly remember the debut in München in Herkules Saal. That was one of the most challenging. There was a debut was in '83, and I remember that a very, very important then critic wrote an interesting, very, very interesting review, which said, among other things, that we got very used to good oiled Russian Klaviermaschinen. And suddenly we hear a thinker. No, not a thinker. No, a thinker. Not stinker. No.
Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes we hear a thinker coming from Russia. And the audacity from someone who comes from Russia to make a debut in Germany, in the major concert hall, in the major city, cultural center of Germany, and so on, in München, with all Schumann program. That seemed, and that came from Joachim Kaiser, who was the music critic and the legend of criticism in Germany of all times, I guess. So it was a very good review, and that somehow propelled me to play here and there because of Kaiser. Mm-hmm. He is long dead, And in America, I was also propelled by a music critic, believe it or not, who became also a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, and he's also dead, unfortunately. And he is very famous. He was rather very famous. Also, he worked for New York Times. Was, I think, for 40 years or something. He was the chief music critic for New York Times, and also gave me somehow a boost when I needed it the most, because I just came to the States and nobody was actually interested in me, because I was not the first Russian who came to New York, and New York was always full of musicians and good ones, and so to compete in New York was next to impossible. I mean, even in the 80s. Then it became not next to impossible, that it became just prohibitive. Anyway, but I was lucky to squeeze myself in between, so I squeezed myself somehow.
Great, thank you.
I got lucky there, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, apart from this, you also have you have brought up a generation of very impressive young artists with international careers. And I mean, I don't think there are many teachers who can boast of having students who have recorded for Deutsche Grammophon or for Sony or for IMG or EMG. Yeah. And you certainly have.
EMI.
Yeah.
EMI,
that's it, yeah. And personally, having heard your students, I was most impressed by two things, really, mostly. It was their individuality and original ideas that come across very strongly. So I would like to ask you, what do you think are the most important ingredients for a successful relationship between teacher and a student?
Oh, my God. How long have you been thinking?
You know, we don't have to go anywhere. We have all day.
I know.
Every day.
No, you know, Kat, I'll tell you something. Well, we talked before. It's no secret, of course. It's not the first time we talk, and it's always a pleasure for me, by the way, to talk to you, because you're one of the most interesting talking partners I've ever met in my life. It's really a delight to talk to you. No, don't take it as the kukushka khvalit. No. This has nothing to do with that. Anyway, because you have interesting ideas. But this particular question, how do you keep a good relationship with your students? First of all, I must say that I never made it my goal to keep a good relationship with a student, and I must say that I cannot claim that I always had a perfect relationship with students. No. Mostly, yes. I recall when I was young and when I started to assist Lyova Aborin, I recall that my students, I was 19, going on 20, and my students, mostly ladies, were about 21, 22, and 23. That was fun. And so, yes, I do remember some of them cried, yes, but only some of them. But then again, I had no experience at all, and all I was basically doing is scolding them in the best possible way I could. So that was also an argument, but obviously not enough. But at 19, you don't expect anything more than that from anyone. So, but then I learned a little bit, and by the time I left Moscow, that is in 78, I was already somehow a little bit seasoned. So, so when I started to teach in New York, nobody cried. So that was already an achievement. That was already something that I achieved. And then we started to develop friendships. How? I don't know. I'm not, in my view, I'm not a demanding teacher. I do not insist on anything, particularly now. I mean, even in New York, I learned at Manhattan School and at Mannes College, I learned that, you know, you should insist only in the very beginning when people don't know anything at all. I mean, completely young people, then you should say, okay, this is A, B, C, but not C, D, E. No. You should do this only this way, and that's it. You cannot do it any other way. Okay, good. So, but then I was fortunate enough to, I don't know, to graduate to some older people, 17, 18, 16, 17, 18, and older. And then, of course, I understood that I don't have to basically to insist on anything. And then I learned something else. I learned something else, that basically what I should do is just advise, and I advised them. And then when I was invited to Frankfurt here, I was already somehow almost formed. So that with the experience of academic experience of 28 years. Oh, I sold myself. Okay, sorry about that. Anyhow, so yes, so after 28 years of experience, I learned a little bit. So, and when I started here at the Hochschule, then was, of course, I was totally free as far as creativity goes.